Welcome to Dancing with the Bards, a podcast where we review tabletop games. My name is Ian, and I'm joined by my co-hosts, Will.
Hello.
Brooke.
Hey.
And returning to the podcast is Chris.
It is I.
Our game this week is the role-playing game Elfinfolk by Adam Baffoni. In this 40-page game, you play as an Elfinfolk, tiny people who live secretly among humans. The game is relatively easy to learn and uses a D10 system to make checks to determine successes. Normally, this is where we would jump into our review, but we've prepared something special for this episode. I had the chance to interview Adam Baffoni as I was doing research for the podcast, and got his permission to include the interview on the podcast. I hope you enjoy it. This is Ian with Dancing with the Bards, and I'm joined by Adam Baffoni, the developer of Elfinfolk and Tether. Am I missing any games?
See, probably. I don't remember. Oh, yes, I have a neat little Lumen game about sky pirates called Tempest. And I've done a lot of writing for other publishers and other people's games. But yeah, I think Elfinfolk and Tether are the big ones.
Okay, yeah, excellent. I knew of those two. I didn't know of Tempest. So I brought you on so that we can discuss some of the aspects of Elfinfolk to cover over the period of a podcast. This will be played back for all my bars later on, so they can all listen in. We'll move right into the first question. What is your inspiration to write Elfinfolk?
Well, this is actually a very easy and straightforward question. So it was not too long after I started getting into creating TTRPG content. Like I was just getting into like writing sort of 5e homebrew stuff and writing homebrew stuff for my various campaigns. And I knew that I wanted to make a game, and I wanted to make a sort of smaller game that was very easy to digest and play. And it was actually while I was kind of in the midst of trying to decide what I wanted to do that I happened to watch the lovely Studio Ghibli film, The Secret World of Arrietty, which of course is based on the novels The Borrowers. And I don't think that it's a big surprise to anyone to say that Elfinfolk is very heavily influenced by The Borrowers and The Secret World of Arrietty. I mean, it basically is The Borrowers, the role-playing game, in a sense. There are some unique aspects to the Elfinfolk communities and things that we've laid out. But, the whole idea of little tiny people living in the walls, I think, in modern media kind of stems from those two pieces.
That's actually really interesting. I actually haven't seen that Studio Ghibli film, so my basis on this was that it was based off of European lore for elves and stuff, where they have the tiny people who live in the rocks and the shrubs and everything.
Yeah, and that is where kind of the name came from. As I started looking more into the origins of this sort of stuff, but the very first kind of kickoff inspiration was that Studio Ghibli film, which I would definitely recommend to anyone who hasn't seen that. It's real beautiful, worth a watch.
And any Studio Ghibli film is worth watching at least once.
Yeah.
All right. So, are there any unique aspects to Elfinfolk that you feel deserve to be highlighted? Mm-hmm. I will say, having read through it, I noticed that it's very easy to get, and a lot of the writing in it seems to be very directed towards beginners for tabletop games.
Definitely, and it was certainly intended that way. I mean, Elfinfolk is kind of unique for me in that it was the first tabletop role-playing game I had ever written. I had done a little bit of board game design stuff previously, nothing that was published, but just kind of independently. And since this was the first tabletop game I had made, I think there is a lot of things that I look back on and would like to, update or think that I would do differently now. But there are also some things that every time I look back and read this book, I remember oh yeah, that was a neat little idea. And one thing that always comes to mind that I really enjoyed about it was the system of overcoming obstacles requiring a set amount of successes on dice rolls. I found that when I played, it really does contribute to a very sort of narrative play. So for anyone who doesn't know or hasn't read the game, essentially the way that overcoming obstacles works is, your GM might say there is this certain thing that you have to overcome. Maybe you're, you have to get through a room from one side to the other, and there's a cat or a dog in the room, and we'll say that's the obstacle and it requires 4 successes to overcome. The players can then each decide in any turn order they want, I want to take X action and I'm going to use this one of my stats, and they will make a roll. And if they succeed on it, then it goes towards the number of successes. And because we handle everything that way, it allows for players to really contribute to the narration, especially when you look at something like combat. There really are no mandatory combat encounters in Elfinfolk, because even if something is presented like a combat encounter, it will be given a number of successes to overcome. It will be treated as an obstacle. And as the players, you could say, yeah, I'm going to, swing my sword and use my strength or use my agility or whatever stat you want and treat it like a combat roll. But you also could, try to, persuade or try to use any of your other stats in any other interesting way that you can possibly think of to overcome that obstacle. And all it requires is, you doing something that could reasonably overcome that obstacle and succeeding on your roll to do so. So I think that's made like some really fun situations for me when I've ran games of Elfinfolk. There have been times that I've presented situations that I thought was going to be a combat encounter that ended up being a social encounter or more of a puzzle in a ways, with players using like vigilance and other sorts of stats to overcome these obstacles.
Which is, I personally noticed that when I was reading through the book, and I've been slowly building an adventure for my bards for next Sunday, and the combat system, I should say really the lack thereof, because it's very flexible,
right?
As to how it works. It allows for a lot more creative solutions, and there's no initiative in this combat, which is something that a lot of other TTRPGs have. That once the game master says start initiative, you no longer have the choice usually to back down from that.
Right.
But that's absolutely always on the table here.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And there's no like specific point of failure for overcoming an obstacle either. It's not like you have to get X number of successes before you get 3 failures or anything like that. It really is. It goes until either the obstacle is overcome or the group decides to try to get away, abandon this thing and go do something else.
Which, considering that their size, is probably usually a safe option.
Yeah, most certainly.
All right. So one of the things we look for on the podcast is any kind of footprint where people can either find ideas for the game or listen to channels that might have gone over gameplay. Do you know of any like communities, either Reddit or Discord, that might have covered Elfinfolk or talked about it all, or maybe even set up games, or any kind of podcasts that might have examples that you particularly enjoyed of gameplay?
So as far as communities that have played, I believe there have been a couple of games over in the Action Fiction Discord server, but that I don't think is a thing that happens regularly. I know that a lot of those guys do enjoy the game. I also know of a few podcasts that have played. One that I found was really fun was called Dice Fiends. That is a smaller TTRPG podcast that played a one shot of Elfinfolk, and it was just fantastic all the way through, start to finish. The other that comes to mind is Role Playing Guys. They did both a review of the game when it had first come out, as well as I think it was a 2 or 3 part like one shot of the game, and that was also a really fun one. I actually really appreciated their review as well, because as I go back and look at the game with now being a more experienced designer, I find that any of their criticisms are things that I also think very much now when I look at it. So I thought that was quite insightful for me. And the third one, of course, is the One Shot podcast. I was very lucky to have Elfinfolk played on the One Shot podcast, which is one of the bigger, if not the biggest, indie TTRPG actual play podcasts out there. There's actually kind of an interesting story behind Elfinfolk being played on the One Shot podcast, and that was that I didn't know it was going to be played on the show. That is to say, I had reached out to them. I sent them an email with an early PDF of the game before it was quite finished. The text was finished, but we were still working on layout and art. And, I pitched the game to them and said, I would love it if you would play this. It would be so awesome, because I enjoy the podcast. And then they never actually wrote back to me and told me that they were going to play it. And I didn't know that they were going to. And they ended up playing it and releasing the episodes before I had finished and released the game. And so when I was still in the process of working on the game, I started getting emails from people, through my website and messages on Twitter saying oh, hey, I heard this game on One Shot. I can't find it. I'm wondering where I can get it. And that kind of put a bit of a fire under me that I was oh, well, I got to, finish the game and get it out now to take advantage of the fact that people are listening to it and interested in it.
And it was, I believe it was in the one of the more recent bundles for the trans rights for Florida bundles too, wasn't it?
I believe you're correct. It has been in a number of bundles. I honestly can't even remember which. Whenever I see a bundle out there, I try to submit it, especially something that is for a cause that I believe in like that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I only know that because I had gotten that for Brooke. For her birthday, one of our other hosts. And as I was mentioning covering this game, she's like, "Oh yeah, I have a copy of that. You got it for me." And I'm like, "Oh." So I figured that's worth bringing up, that it's something you can usually find pretty easy accessibility wise.
Yeah, absolutely. I try to throw it out there in bundles when I see them around.
All right, so moving then into my fourth question for you. Do you have any plans to add any more to the game in the future? In that regard, I'm also talking about things like revisions or maybe small story modules, things like that. I realize that with some of these smaller indie games, that's not always an option you have. So it's not something we really grade harsh. It depends on the project. If I were to go for something like Dungeons and Dragons, for example, I might even give them a lower score with how much expanded content they have. It's almost overwhelming.
Yeah, definitely.
It depends on the scenario.
So this is actually kind of a bit of a loaded question, I guess, because the answer is yes and no. Not too long after I had released Elfinfolk, I did start working on a supplement, which eventually turned into a second edition of sorts. And I have been working slowly, little bits at a time, on a project that I think I would call Elfinfolk Definitive Edition, something like that, because it is not necessarily a second edition, but it is a revised version of Elfinfolk. There are, like I said, a lot of things that I love about the game, and an equal number of things that I would like to improve upon or change about the game. And the biggest one for me that I've always looked back and said I would change a little bit is sort of a lack of jumping off points for new players. Like I know you had said upon reading the game, it felt like a lot of it was really geared towards beginner players and new players, and that is definitely the case. And my sort of philosophy at the time of creating it was, I want to make the rules and the character creation sort of as short and as brief as possible in the game text, and as open-ended as possible, and that will make it very easy for new players to pick up and to make a character and to start playing, because there's not a lot they have to read, and there's not a lot they have to remember, etc. But after running a whole lot of games of Elfinfolk for both new and experienced players, I have found that for the very new players, that lack of direction almost makes things harder. So, when you are creating a character in Elfinfolk, there is no list of sort of character archetypes. There is no list of character equipment. There is no sort of lists like that of things that you can just choose from. and have the inspiration for who your character is. You know, the first step of character creation is create your character concept, like decide who you want your character to be. And for an experienced role player, that's great and it's a lot of fun. But I also do think that for like a brand new role player, that can almost be overwhelming. Like the lack of direction can be just as overwhelming as the amount of content that you have to digest before you start making a character in a larger TTRPG, but almost on the opposite end of the spectrum. And so that was one of the big things that I started working on. I was creating a second edition / definitive edition that had character archetypes, and then it also had a collection of adventures. I had commissioned 12 different short adventures. They're all about 1 to 2 pages, written by 12 of the absolutely most amazing writers and designers in the indie TTRPG space. And they all got written and they were all amazing. People like Kristen Devine, people like Valis Teo. There were a lot of different ones. I can't even name all of them off the top of my head right now. And there was everything from, I think one of the adventures was like, there's like an annual chicken race in the backyard of this house, and you have to tame a chicken and find a way to create a saddle and participate in this chicken race. There was another one where like you were a group of Elfinfolk living in the walls of this bakery of this girl who was very passionate about it, but the business was kind of failing, and you had to find ways to like almost like help out the bakery behind the scenes that the owner of the place didn't see and didn't notice the little creative things you were doing to drive more business to the place so that you wouldn't, so that she would be able to keep her bakery. There was one where you were a group of Elfinfolk who lived in a grocery store, and after hours at the grocery store, there were different sorts of communities of Elfinfolk who all lived in there that, rode around on the little machines in the grocery store, and it was almost like a Mad Max Fury Road type adventure where you were sort of like battling on these little grocery store machines and carts and things. There were so many of them. One was like a Southeast Asian night market that had a kind of a plethora of different adventure hooks in there with it. And I have all these adventures. They're all written. And then the third and last part of this was going to be sort of an equipment compendium, and it was presented as the journal of a very famous Elfinfolk explorer who was kind of recounting his journeys and giving examples of all these different things that he had seen used by different Elfinfolk communities around the world, with like different examples of pieces of equipment that you could use based on household items. And I was very excited about this project. It would be really amazing. The way that my work schedule is, because I own a business. My family owns quite a large poultry farm here in Rhode Island, and I kind of go through these cycles of, we have our slow times where I'm not working much and I have a lot of time to devote to creativity, and I start working furiously on a project, and then all of a sudden we have a busy time and I'm working 80-90 hours a week and I have to put it down. And then the next time we have a slow time and I can work on something, I always end up just starting something entirely new. So I'm kind of always in a state of like, I have 30 works in progress, and I'm probably going to start something new before I work on any of my current works in progress. Because that's just my biggest character flaw, I guess.
That's a normal thing I've heard about from other creators before, of just having all these projects just kind of laid out.
Yeah, and so like this project is out there and it exists, and it's something that I really want to do. I struggle a bit with the fact that I don't have the same freedom to just fund the project myself that I did at one point. When I had written Elfinfolk, there was no Kickstarter or anything like that. I just funded it myself, which was fine, and it was a great idea because I did it on a very small scale, and the game was profitable, which I'm very happy about. But now I have a little 6-month-old daughter who is absolutely wonderful. So I just, am not as ready to invest my money into creating a larger project. as I would have been maybe a year or two ago when I knew I could just sit around and wait for that investment to come back once I actually finish the project and get it out. So there is kind of that aspect of it where I don't have the same means to self-publish that I did once, and I don't have the sort of energy and time to devote to a Kickstarter right now. But hopefully in the future, that's something that I will get around to doing.
Absolutely. I can only imagine, with all that on your plate, it's difficult to kind of manage a hobby, because even as a business, it does kind of boil down to it's a work of passion, not as much.
Absolutely.
I mean, you made a profit on it, which is more than I can say. This is a money sink for me. But it's hard to manage that with everything else going on, with full-time work, with managing family. It's a big thing, and I think a struggle that most people in our hobby would find challenging.
Oh, absolutely. It's a lot of work. It's a labor of love to create any sort of content. Anything, whether you're making, a YouTube channel, a Twitch stream, a podcast, short fiction, games, anything. It's something that, like, people discredit the amount of work that it takes because it's something that creators do for fun. But really it's an amazing amount of labor.
Yeah. So moving on to my other questions here, real quick. Are there any other games that you felt kind of gave you inspiration when you were building Elfinfolk?
Yeah. I mean, there's
Not to be in like copyright trouble or anything.
Yeah. There are a ton of games that I took inspiration from. I mean, I guess I could, like any designer, I guess you can kind of look back at every game you've ever played and enjoyed and realize maybe there's one little thing that you kind of liked and have taken inspiration from as part of your signature style of design. But I guess the one glaring one that really comes out to me is the what I refer to as the Dice Up system. So for anyone who does not know of the company Dice Up Games, they are some of the best game makers and publishers in the business. They do a lot of like games that are like all ages and games for kids. I know they recently put out the game Adorablins, which is really cute. Absolutely love it. Go buy that game if you don't have it. But they also have a sort of system that they've used for a few games and a few works in progress that I've play tested with them. The one that is published that I know of that uses the system is a game called the North Sea Epilogues. The TTRPG of the North Sea Epilogues. There are also some board games made by other designers. And that system uses something similar to what I had described as the way that obstacles are overcome earlier in this podcast. In fact, I think that you and I played a one-shot of the North Sea Epilogues a long time ago, about 2 or 3 years ago. We recorded it for a podcast, and that also never got released because that's just what I do. That's just what I do. It was with Tim Devine, that's right. And Tim Devine is actually one half of Dice Up Games. Tim Devine was one of the designers of that game. The other half is Kristen Devine, who I mentioned earlier, who had written one of the adventures for the potential definitive edition of Elfinfolk.
I had mentioned to when I was trying to sell this to my other bards. I was talking about how the basically the ease at which you can kind of read through the rule book and get an understanding of how it works and how that really appeals to new players. We were talking about I don't know if you've ever heard of The Excellence before. It's a tabletop game where it uses the polygon system, I believe.
Okay, I have not heard of it.
Polymorph system, and it has the same kind of feel as far as walking people through every step of the way. It uses a very colorful language to kind of keep the player engaged, and it does the same thing of keeping the dice rolls very simple, using checks to do that kind of thing to make successes. And when I was reading through this, it reminded me of that. It was one of the first games we actually covered here, and one that I've played a few times since with my friend groups. But it was Just a comparison.
I'm actually gonna have to check that game out now because that sounds really, really damn cool.
Oh, it's a lot of fun. You play as a princess of anything you want, really. Kind of like one of those like '90s cartoon Sailor Moon-esque kind of things. And everyone gets their own element of sorts, whether it's like candy or paper mache or anything.
I love that. I love that.
It was the only episode I've worn a dress for our recording.
That's fantastic.
So what tabletop games do you personally enjoy, or either growing up or now? What are you currently into?
Well, I've always been a big fan of board games. When it comes to tabletop role-playing games, I guess I'm a bit of a late bloomer. I didn't really... They're one of those things that I always looked at with interest, but didn't have a group to play with. I didn't really start playing tabletop role-playing games until I was, I think, about 23, maybe 24. And I decided I was sick of waiting around for someone else to run a game for me. I was just going to gather some friends, and I was going to be the GM. And that's how I became the forever GM. And
I know that struggle very well.
Yeah. So the first tabletop role-playing game I played was Fate Core, which I love. I know a lot of people have very charged opinions about Fate Core. Like, most people either love it or think it's very flawed or doesn't really fit their style or don't like it at all. And I really think it's fantastic. It's just a very fun system for me. I guess a part of that is probably the nostalgia of it being the first ever campaign that I ran. So that's definitely one. Also, like I said, I was a big board gamer before.
Mm-hmm. And we cover board games too, so feel free to list your favorites.
I was always a big Small World fan. Back when I was in college, I played a ton of Small World. The game that shall not be named, of course, Munchkin. I guess everyone can say right. I guess it's almost embarrassing to say you've played.
We actually covered Munchkin recently, and I hadn't played it in years. So like I had played it when I was in college or even younger, and to me at the time it all seemed fine. And then you kind of look at it later and you're like, no, it really wasn't, was it?
Of course, no hate to Steve Jackson games.
It's a little dated.
It's just dated, and it's one of those games that is like, I guess the best way that I can describe it is like it was the overplayed radio song of board gamers. I guess it was the one that like people who don't really play board games would be like, oh yeah, I love board games. I play weird ass obscure board games. Have you ever heard of Munchkin? Like that sort of thing. It is a really fun game, and it had a huge influence, and it got a lot of people into board gaming, and kind of it has been that gateway game for a lot of people. So I have a lot of respect for it.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, most of the people I know who do board games at some point either started with or early on they played Munchkin.
Yeah, absolutely, and I'm no different there. Just to shout out one board game that I've been playing recently that I really love. It's called Modern Art. I've played it once a week with I have like a weekly board game group going right now, and we've played Modern Art for the last 3 weeks. It is like an auction game. It's kind of like a social engineering game, but it's not a lying game. It is simply like a market manipulation game. Essentially, each player is the owner of an art museum, and you take turns auctioning off art pieces. And then at the end of each round, those you get money for how much each of those art pieces is worth. And every piece of art kind of starts the game with no value at all. And then as pieces by each artist sell more and more, those artists become more and more valuable, and you can sell them for more, and then you earn more money for having them. So it's very much a game of like trying to manipulate the market so that your art, which technically started off the game worth nothing at all, just like everybody else's, is now worth more just because more people want it. It's very, very fun, and bears some similarities to what I imagine the real world of auctioning fine art is like. That the media itself has no value outside of its perceived value, which is a very fun way to play the game.
Yeah, I actually didn't do too many board games initially. I was really into role-playing games Like most people, I started with D&D. Unlike most people, I started with 4th edition, which was my mistake. But then I moved to 3.5 and then 5th edition.
Yeah.
But I didn't really start getting deep into board games until I started doing this podcast. Because I had initially had the idea to do this for only tabletop role-playing games. And I quickly realized I don't have the time to learn a new system every month.
Yeah.
So board games have become a filler, and I've found them very enjoyable. I mean, I have my favorite games too. Cosmic Encounter is easily my favorite board game, and it's been around forever. Wingspan we're doing next month.
Wingspan is great.
Yeah, Wingspan is great. My friend was trying to get me to play Scythe for the longest time, and I was like, "Oh, it looks a little complicated." And he's like, "Well, here's this, but it has birds." And I'm like, "Okay, you got it."
Ah, yes, it's dense. Yeah. It's dense, but it's so good.
It is. It is very good. So we'll move on to one of my second to last question is, do you have any tips for anyone who might be starting to run or play in Give Elfinfolk for the first time?
I actually have a weird and kind of obscure recommendation. And this is one that was given to me by, here we go, another shout out to the legend Tim Devine. I love this man. I love the Devines. They're just some of my favorite people in the TTRPG space. I always end up talking about them everywhere I go. Tim Devine had played a game of Elfinfolk with me. I ran a game for him and some other people. And at the end of it, he had a very fun idea. He said, I would love to take this game to a convention. And what I would do when I'm running a game is I would make the pre-made character sheets and I would hand those out. Well, you don't have to make pre-made character sheets, but everyone would get their character and play their character, but the character sheets would not have any equipment on them. And then I would take a big old bag filled with a bunch of little tiny household items, whether it is, a plastic spoon or a piece of string or, an old hair clip or what have you, just a ton of little household items. And I would dump the bag out in the middle of the table. And I would say, okay, equip your characters. Your character's equipment can contain of any of the stuff here in this, in the middle of the table, and you can use it however you want. And I thought that was such a fun little idea because it is a way of both giving the players a jumping off point so they're not totally lost as to where to start. It gives them a huge list of equipment that they can use. Here's the stuff that you can equip your character with, but it also stimulates the imagination in that it doesn't tell you how you have to use that equipment. It sort of lets you put it together in any way that you think your character might want to use.
That is amazing. I'm probably going to steal that idea, or at least attempt to, because the session I'm running is going to be like a 18th century lighthouse, so I'll have to be a little creative with it.
Yeah.
I'm probably going to do something along those lines now for the stream, because that is ingenious. I love it.
I really, really have. I've carried that idea with me for a while now, and I hope to do it someday.
That is great. Anything else for anyone to kind of starting up a campaign? Any ideas that maybe something they should look into if they're going to? I know the book mentioned like looking up like blueprints for houses and locations.
Yeah, that is I have found that when I've ran little campaigns of Elfinfolk, I have always beforehand like sort of gone and drawn out like, oh well, this is the building that they're in, right? That they live in this building. So I will make essentially the world map is just like the outline of like where each room is, and I think that's something that's very important to do. But also, I guess you don't have to be too detailed with it because it will all come into play as things happen and as players ask questions. That's like, I think it's fun to take a bit of a Blades in the Dark approach to it, where when something that I always found fun about running Blades in the Dark is like when I know that my players have to go rob a bank or something, I don't have to create that bank beforehand. I don't need to know what it looks like. I wait until my player says, oh, is this thing nearby? Is this room nearby? Can I do this over here? And then I decide, yep, that's exactly where it is. Great job. You get to do the cool thing you wanted to do.
All right. So we're going to start wrapping up here. Before we do, Are there any upcoming projects that you're working on that we should keep an eye out for?
Yeah, I actually have a few things that I can shout out here. So the one project that I've been working on for a while that I'm very excited about is not a game at all. It is a 6-part audio fiction podcast. It is a sort of mystery slash horror podcast called Uncovering Dunridge. I had done all the scripting about a year ago, and maybe 5 months ago or so, I finally did the casting and recorded it all, and I've been working slowly on the editing process of it. It's actually pretty close to done. So with any luck, by the time this podcast is out, it will either be uploaded or on the way to being uploaded. So you can keep up with me for that. And then I also have two other good projects worth mentioning, both of which are games being published by the fantastic publishers Action Fiction. um, so the next game that Action Fiction is working on is a pretty awesome sci-fi horror TTRPG called Cthulhu Dreamt, which I did not work on the actual story aspects of it just yet, but I designed the system from scratch for that game. It's a quite a fun like D12 system. It was a system that I had actually made quite a while ago with another designer named Trevor Roop, who does not design games anymore, is not really in the TTRPG space anymore, but was a fantastic designer.
I'm actually very excited for that one personally.
Yeah, I
I
think
saw
that's
that the Kickstarter is going to be relaunched soon.
yes, I believe August the Kickstarter will be launched, so definitely keep an eye out for that. Cthulhu Dreamt. It is based on a sort of heavy metal concept album by the artist Reed Reimer, which is so cool. And the
I was about
game,
to say I'm coming for
yeah,
that vinyl.
yeah, oh yeah, and the game has like a companion novel and a companion heavy metal soundtrack, which like has both like straight up heavy metal vocalized songs that are just fun to listen to, as well as tracks that are meant to be backing tracks to like certain parts of the adventure path that it comes with. So that is going to be super cool, and the whole aesthetic of it is just really awesome. And then the other game that I'm working on with Action Fiction right now is actually a board game, which should launch on Kickstarter within the next year. It is called Goblin Cave, and it is a 4-player team battler. It is almost like a PvP dungeon crawler, where each team of 2 players controls 4 different characters with unique abilities, and it ends up playing out very similar to like a MOBA or a hero shooter type game, but on a tabletop with miniatures. It's quite a fun little skirmish game that we should be hitting Kickstarter with. It'll probably, I would assume, early 2024.
That yeah, I think I've seen them mention it. I also I don't talk about it too much on the podcast. I try not to play favorites, but I've always followed Action Fiction. I haven't been as active on their Discord lately, but it's definitely worth checking out for anyone
Yeah, they're
listening.
awesome. They do some really cool stuff. They actually have been demoing Goblin Cave at they demoed it at PAX East. I'm sorry, PAX Unplugged, the last PAX Unplugged. They will be at the next PAX Unplugged. I think they opted out of Gen Con this year because there's no sort of COVID guidelines whatsoever, so they opted out of that. But they will probably be at Origins this summer. And maybe a handful of other conventions, and I know they've been bringing Goblin Cave around and playing that, so definitely check it out if you ever happen to see the Action Fiction booth at any conventions around.
Excellent. Yeah, I probably won't be doing any conventions this year. Next year is when I'm going to start taking time off for those.
Yeah,
And
awesome. They're
be
so much
around.
fun.
All right. Well, thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate you making the time for this. I know you have a really busy schedule lately.
Of course. Thank you. I appreciate you having me on, and it's always awesome to see that people play my games. I've been kind of out of the loop of releasing games. Like I said, I've been working on those 2 games sort of behind the scenes, but it's been a long time since I've really released anything and interacted a lot with the community in that way. So it's awesome to see that even though I haven't put out any games in about a year, there are still seem to be quite often I hear people talk about, Tether and Elfinfolk, and hear that they're playing them. So that is really, really in just fantastic to me.
Oh yeah, I wanted to cover this for a while. When I cover something though, I usually make sure it's been out for at least a year, so that they've had time to do any revisions, they've had time to announce any new content or anything like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that I don't give anyone an unfair review, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. Which I think is a good thing to do.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you very much for joining us today. I really appreciate this.
Of course, and I hope that the session that you guys play is awesome. I'll definitely be tuning into it.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you. Hey, you have a good day.
You too.
All right. So, with that out of the way, moving into number of players. I gave this a 2. 2 to 8 players for this game. 8, I can see 2 if you're one-on-one with someone. I know that's a thing. I've never personally liked those kinds of tabletops, but I know that some people can only get 2 people together. 8 seems like a little much, especially for a game that's so open-ended like this.
Yeah.
I did a similar. I was 2 because just the range was too much for me. It doesn't give you enough guidelines for optimal play.
Mm-hmm.
I always consider number of players in tabletop role-playing games a upper and lower limits. So they're saying at very minimum you need 2 people, and at very maximum you can play with 8 people, but that anywhere in between is a happy median. So I think I gave it a 3 for that.
I always found that being an endorsement, though. They're saying, you can play this with 8 people.
Yeah. I think 3 to 6 is a little bit more acceptable than 2 to 8.
Because you can play outside those bases anyway.
Yeah.
There's nothing stopping you from adding more or less. But the person is endorsing it, saying like, this game works very well for this.
Yeah.
I would at least put some kind of limiters at like 7 or 8 just to,
they did.
Or even a guide to just say, well, if you have this many players, you may want to try to guide the story in this kind of direction, kind of thing. Because this book has a lot of that, where it goes into detail about how to run certain things. At the very least, it might want to focus in on saying, well, if you have 8 players, first of all, good luck.
Yeah.
But also, you may want to try to limit interactions, or maybe have like a timer even going. Because even in a session that's a lot more structured than Elfinfolk, 8 players is a lot to run something.
8 players is too many.
Quite literally.
Yes.
That brings us into inclusivity. I gave it a 3. The artwork in this is, it is inclusive. I don't think there's any kind of difficulties with reading or anything in this. It's very limited as far as the character sheet.
Yeah. I gave this an easy 3. I had no troubles reading this or comprehending this or digesting this. It was definitely one of the easier games that we've played. We only needed to have it explained to us twice.
Oh, yeah.
But I feel like I'm also kind of going into comprehension a little on that.
Plus, having it in the digital format as well means you can add plugins to help you with it too. So font isn't an issue or anything like that, because there's great things like, I think it's Open Dyslexia, which gives a dyslexic font to anything on the internet.
Then moving right into comprehension. Once again, a 3 for me. This was really not hard to understand. I read through this book over the last 2 weeks to put this together. There are some things that I will say, rules-wise, I think could be improved. The rate of play for things like the combat, for example, there was no initiative. There was very little guidance on it. I think it could do with a tiered system for that. Like, I was reading through Badge Quest recently, which is a game that we'll cover here eventually, because as I've been looking at the book, I just got it. So I'm still digesting it. But it has a combat system that's tiered into 3 stages. One is thinking, running, and then fighting. So they go off in that order. So we can plan, run, or fight. And something like this, where combat is not necessary, it might benefit from having that kind of guide. But
like structure.
Yeah, because as I was running this, I don't know if you guys noticed, it was it got to a point where I couldn't like figure out what I was doing.
Insofar as combat, or
well, the combat, or also just like what my purpose there was as a game master.
You were
You
kind of
would
the
tell us
story
how difficult,
facilitator.
and you'd give us the story.
You were the voice of reason when we could just, like when you were a kid and you played pretend and you were like, my superpower is all the superpowers.
Yeah, I guess this also kind of goes into like enjoyment and stuff too, because we don't have the gameplay as much for tabletops. But I just couldn't think of a better place to fit this into than comprehension. Other than reading off the story to you, I kind of felt like I wasn't really doing a whole lot.
in fairness, we had the only role play we had was at the start because the rest of it was you presenting the challenges to us. So yeah, I could get that in something like this, there's a lot less play that the DM actually makes apart from making the story and then the NPCs.
So what do you all think about materials?
I mean, it comes currently as a PDF, but we have the physical copy, right?
Yeah, I got this I got the physical copy when the game first came out. They had taken it down for a while. I know they were talking about bringing it back again at some point, but I have no timetable on that. So it is just available on DriveThruRPG right now, and it only needs the 10-sided die for the game.
Yeah.
Character sheets are also a PDF available online.
What do you guys give that for score?
3 for me.
Solid 3.
I give it 2. Although, based on your justifications, I think I should have given it a 3. I don't know. I just feel like there wasn't a whole lot there for me to grade. I understand it's also $14, so like I can't be like, well, I demand the world. But
I mean, a lot of games have shown us that doesn't necessarily matter.
I agree, but I mean, if you flip through that, they've got some nice color to them, but then they very quickly turn to like this monochromatic black and white like text, and it looks like a book.
A short book, but a book nonetheless.
Yeah.
I mean, I will say they do take effort to make sure that things stand out as far as the boxes around the text.
Page.
Oh yeah, the one gripe I had with the rules was during character creation. They didn't have a box around the gear step, but they had one around every other step in the thing. So I couldn't find where the gear section was at first on this.
Oh, that's a little annoying, yeah.
But yeah, that is
A minor gripe.
yeah. That's just an editing gripe, and I don't even know. That's something you can fix in the PDF too.
Yeah.
So if they have updates, that might be fixed, and this might just be something that was wrong with the physical version, which could be why they removed it.
Yeah.
Could be.
It's all your fault. Yeah.
I know, I'm the worst.
So moving into gameplay? Or did we have more we want to talk about materials?
I think we're pretty much covered on materials. It really is just the D10, the character sheet, and the PDF.
Well, it doesn't come with the D10, just for reference.
Oh yeah, no. But that's all that's required for.
But usually when we talk about materials, it's what comes with it.
Yeah.
If you've played another tabletop RPG before, you probably already have a D10. Hopefully, yeah.
Moving into setup then. I ran through character sheets with each one of you. It took maybe 10, 20 minutes. I don't think... And did any of you guys have a difficult time understanding the setup at all?
I mean, it was a little more freeform than I was used to, so that did make it a little trickier. My only other issue with it is, like, I feel like you being more experienced in RPGs helped a lot in that process of, like, suggestions and making it.
Mm-hmm.
And if someone was to get this book and try and do it for the first time, I think this is a harder system for a newer player.
And I mean, on top of that too, once you start getting into like the 6, 7, 8 people, especially because this game has an upper limit of 8 players, I feel like it becomes a very daunting task for the GM to work with each player and do the background characters and create stuff like that and come up with coherent backstory. Because at that point, that's 16 unique characters total that you have to come up with, and that's on the low end.
Yeah, that I didn't even consider that for the NPCs. Honest, I had forgotten about. We'd only used, I think,
I wanted
3 or 4
to
of
show
them.
up.
I was considering having him show up in the house or towards the top of the cupola or the cupola.
Oh, there it is.
Cupola.
You goofed it.
I know, I goofed it.
Yeah,
Leave it
Bond-
in.
Bond was an NPC I made
No.
that was just a bumblebee that.
I think I got this.
Because he said cupola wrong.
Yeah.
I knew it.
Just like how he said keratin wrong earlier.
Chitin.
Chitin.
I will add, are the connections required? Because we could have skipped that step, I think. It's not really integral to the character, but it just like fleshes out the world and also your background.
It is in the actual character setup itself. The connections are supposed to encourage. So the connections are supposed to encourage the personality of the character, essentially, to give more of a story arc to something that is otherwise kind of two-dimensional, I think, for character creation.
Yeah.
Just because it only has the 6 stats and the talents. I really think it's really just there to flesh out your character and encourage role-playing.
Yeah, but I also feel like that's if you felt like with specifically 7 players and 1 DM and 8 people playing, if you felt like coming up with 16 NPCs would be too much, you could just completely skip that part.
Yeah, I suppose so.
Or just like do 1.
Or 1,
just,
yeah. 1 would probably be a little easier at that point.
Yeah.
I don't think I could manage 16 different character voices.
There's
I mean, we were at what, 6, and we named one Bearemy.
There is one gripe that I had, but I didn't actually take away points for it because it's not really a fault of the system. Because of how freeform it is in determining your talents, which are just like the things that your character is good at, you could be like me when we played and end up choosing talents that won't really pop up or would require some stretches of the imagination to use properly, like swimming in a scenario when you've not gone anywhere near water. So that is something that would probably crop up in other one-shots, unless there was like a little bit of additional work that the DM put into informing the players of what might be useful in those given scenarios.
So, on that note, real quick, for the gameplay on that, if you get enough experience points, you can actually add a talent to your list that usually revolves around something that you've done recently. So you could pick up a skill that would build that over time. But on one-shots, you're right. Yeah, it really wouldn't come into play.
Mm-hmm.
Speaking of play, rate of play.
I think it was paced well.
Yeah. I mean, I gave it a 2 as the game master, as I said before. It hit points where I was giving you guys difficulty checks, and that was really it. I kind of felt a little bored as someone who's done a lot more complex stuff for game master stuff before.
Yeah. No, I could definitely tell you were getting a little bored there.
I'm just used to having multiple enemies out, to having this is how far you are from this thing, as opposed to you make it up the staircase and you made it to the lighthouse. And that could also just be the story that I wrote, but I have to imagine that at some point the mechanics of it are really fun for the player because it's very open for you guys to explore this world, whereas I'm just telling a story.
Yeah.
I gave it a 2 from the player perspective, but I also, I do agree that there is not really a lot of pacing that the do we call it a dungeon master? Should we
Game master?
Game master that the game master can really do during the game to either make it more fun for themselves or to even like adjust the pace, since it's very player driven in terms of the actions that they take and how they describe their successes versus their failures. Now a portion that I'm sure is going to get great points from all of us. Price.
Yeah, 3 for price.
3.
You
Easily.
can't beat it
It's so inexpensive. It's
for what it
criminal.
is too.
For a McDouble meal, you could have hundreds of hours of enjoyment from this tabletop role
I
playing
wouldn't
game.
say hundreds.
You
but
could have tens of hours of enjoyment.
Dozens, perhaps 2 dozens of hours.
I think that for the price, yeah, it's very good. $9 is
12 for the physical, right?
it was. I don't honestly. I believe it was in that range, but it's been so long. I got this almost 3 years ago now.
I couldn't imagine it being much more than that.
No,
Just
it's
looking
only
at the
40
way it is.
pages. Yeah, and
Yeah.
it's the way it's printed.
I'm surprised they haven't gone. I know, like, there's probably a legal reason they can't, but Amazon Direct print has been a huge, like, it's exploding the children's illustration market right now for independent illustrators. So I wouldn't be shocked if board gaming or tabletopping went in that direction too, because this would be an easy one to transfer over into it.
Actually, that's a good point. Yeah, that's a good to know.
I, for a second, thought you were just going to finish with Amazon is exploding the children. I'm glad you finished it.
No.
They're not there yet.
Yet.
They're not?
But I also feel it should be important, because I think we talked about it before, as well as during the interview, that it's often included with within bundles that the creator or that bundles that support not quite programs, but like I can't remember
Is it part
the
of
charities.
The itch.io?
Yeah.
Okay.
They
So like when
throw
they
them
did
into
the
as many of those
BLM or
bundles as they can.
yeah.
Exactly.
That's why I believe you ended up with a copy of it in the bundle I gave you.
Yeah.
You heard it here first, everyone. Give your besties bundles.
Absolutely,
It is a great
especially
gift.
when
I
you
love 'em.
support good causes.
Yeah.
All right, now into the
Extras.
So best
Yeah.
part.
I feel like for the extras, I gave it a 1, unfortunately.
Same.
They have mentioned in the interview that they're working on something stuff to add to this, especially like the stories, which I think is a great idea.
Can you just expand on what the stories are for a second?
They gave some of the examples in the
Oh, it's in the
interview,
okay.
yeah,
Okay.
but so that basically settings, adventures
Okay.
that they have pre-written that I feel this will benefit a lot from, because creating a story out of nothing is very challenging. And while they do offer some adventure hooks in the book, it's very basic as far as like you could rescue a town or save a person or go foraging. Coming up with a setting, a time, and a place to run something like this, I focused on something very narrow in order to build a story for this. But that's only because I've kind of done this before.
Mm-hmm.
Starting from scratch with something like that as a game master might be a little more challenging, especially for a book that's very focused towards newer players, as this one definitely is.
All right.
Yeah.
And for community, then, let's go back. I didn't let anyone else speak.
Yeah, no, I did just want to tie into what you were saying. You know, I did give it 1 star, but I will say I gave it an asterisk that I do feel like that will go up, you know, once they release the stories, just like what you said. I kind of just want to piggyback off of your comment there.
I gave it a half for hope, so I have a 1.5 with the hopes that they can fill in the rest. So for community, is there any? I didn't see any on our little cheat sheets.
They mentioned in the
Interview.
Thank you. That there is a community in the like action fiction Discord, if I'm not mistaken.
Mm-hmm.
They do play games there or organize them there. They have covered the game on the One Shot Pod, which is a fairly popular tabletop role-playing game podcast. So if you're looking for examples of gameplay, there's that. There's us now.
Yeah.
But
I more meant like I didn't see anything in my very cursory, because work's been crazy, very cursory research, like where you could find people easily to play.
there isn't. And I will say that's always going to be something that kind of hampers smaller indie games for us. I gave it a 2 with that consideration because it has had some outreach, but it definitely could improve that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's also something that can't really be.
Well, I mean, there's
fixed
still
very
things that I still think of Kids on Bikes as kind of an indie thing, but you can find people pretty easily that either know of it or have played it before or heard of it at least. And
yeah, you can definitely work towards building communities even just around your game, including it at cons, things like that.
They're just not here currently.
Yeah.
But
personal.
I gave it a 3 for enjoyment. I love this. I've been critical, but I would play this often.
Any day, every day.
Yeah, 3 for me as well. I really enjoyed the gameplay. Even during the slower moments as the game master, I was able to enjoy vicariously live through you guys having fun.
This is actually the part where I did subtract some points because of that it is a little unfair, but this is in the same vein of the setup area where also my terrible luck throughout the entirety of the playthrough.
That's what it is.
I had fun throughout most of it, but God, it felt like regardless of what skill I was using, the way that the dice were working out, it was just like, there's no way you can succeed on this. I think I succeeded twice throughout all of that, and both times were on what were they called? The vigilance, the perception and whatnot, which I had a 7 in. But anytime I tried to use my agility, which also had a 7, I would fail.
I felt that made it more realistic, though. We're supposed to be, at least in our story, starting adventures.
Yeah.
So it worked well for our storyline.
The fail success system I've noticed for something like this, the fail success system has definitely some downsides. It came up once or twice, I think, in the excellence as well, because it had that chart where you had to roll between this number in order to hit this success. There's a limit to how often you'll be successful in a chart like that, as opposed to a D20 system where you have multiple dice and modifiers and things like that, where random chance definitely impacts how you feel about your roll. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But the more modifiers you have, the better you feel you're going to do. Whereas in this, it's just you roll a D10, you have your set score on your sheet, and it's either -2 or +2. And I could definitely see how that impacts the enjoyment for someone who's used to a lot more complex system.
I just think it could benefit from a fate point system or something, where you have, or I guess some people might know it as hero points, where you have a small pool of not refreshing. Yeah, not refilling, or not refreshing, yeah, that's a better way of putting it. Not refreshing points, which you can use to either improve your score or to auto-succeed, depending on your system, just in the event that, I really need to succeed on X thing or else something bad happens, I, expend a point, a hero point or a fate point or whatever, to improve my chances of success.
Moving into recommendation. I gave it a 3 for recommendation. The reason being is something like this is something that I would play when we used to do late nights at Denny's. When we were there after Gamer's Gambit for 3 hours. And
more than 3 hours there, Fred.
Yeah.
6 to 8.
There was a reason why I picked a place that was 24 hours.
Yeah. But if you're looking for a tabletop game that was easy to put together, but you're tired of board games, we used to do Escape Jurassic Park all the time. And this would definitely be something that's a step up above that, as far as both complexity and enjoyment, I think.
I didn't give it a good score. I gave it a 1 because I really felt it was, and I loved this, but it was jarring as a D&D player or a player of more strict games, but it was too free for people who hadn't played before. So it was this weird middle ground of people who need a break from what they had. But I felt like, we even said it a couple times during it, where it's it felt like we were detoxing from our other games. So I'd be hesitant to recommend it for that reason.
I feel like if somebody has never played D&D before, but is interested in the sort of tabletop community, This might be a good way to get them interested in the game without overwhelming them or bogging them down with too many rules.
But having that freedom of choice too is just as overwhelming.
I do get that. I mean, I've definitely run D&D campaigns for new players, and I've run into the same problem where it's like, you're at this place. What do you do? And they just are like, I don't know. So I get that.
Yeah, and I mean, I gave the scores pretty, like, this has a good score for me. Like, it's not a bad score. Just like this part in particular, I just couldn't.
Yeah.
As with most things, I gave it an actual 3 because I would definitely recommend this game. I would recommend it with perhaps the recommendation of added structure from the DM for if they're doing a specific story, maybe having like a subset of talents to have the players choose from. Maybe pre-making characters so that the players have a baseline. So each character is based on like an archetype. And so they can add the personality and connections that they want, but then each character already has their stats, and they can use that archetype as a baseline to understand what they're good at and what they might not be so good at.
Pre-made characters would do this game a lot of good, I think, actually.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. I think that would fix several of the issues that we've already put forward.
Yeah.
I'm glad I brought it up then. Now in replay value.
Yeah.
So I gave it a 2 for replay value. I enjoyed it. I could do it again. The few problems I would have with it is, one, if I wanted to run it with a group, it would probably be you guys again, which means I'd have to write a new story. Which I worked a while on putting this together because I had to build it really from the ground up. But also, that freedom of choice is kind of exhausting sometimes. I like a game with a little bit more structure, and I find those a little more comfortable when I'm looking for something that I can do multiple times.
Yeah, okay. I mean, I also gave it a 2, but mainly more for I think we brought this up when we were recording the Twitch stream. This is a very good game in between like D&D campaigns. Playing like 2 or 3, sessions of this in between a much larger game, I think as a good palate cleanser. I think it works very well there. I don't think I could do like a full length campaign. I don't think I could commit like multiple months to playing this game. I think I would have fun, but like you said, I feel like it would be a little exhausting. Where it's just like...
See, I could play this every week and be happy. Like, this is my style of gaming.
I feel like at a certain point, because my thought process is, with D&D, some DMs tend to have this problem where they overplan things. With this, you can't really plan anything. So I feel like you're kind of swinging in the opposite direction, where it's just like you have no idea what's going to happen or what the players are going to want to do next session. So what's the point of really preparing anything over just sort of the broader strokes?
Okay, I think I actually have a unique perspective on this one because I ran Upwind for you guys. And so if I was to do this, I give this a 2 for replay because of the same reasons that Ian mentioned, in that it seems like it would be very, very hard to come up with new ideas because of, one, the stories that they planned were not released yet, and 2, you kind of have to come up with it all from basically nothing. But with my experience in Upwind, which was very much freeform, I basically just create the obstacles and you guys create the solutions, and then we build from there. It's a lot easier for me to think of just the baseline of what happens and then just let everything branch out from that baseline, as opposed to trying to think of all of the different eventualities that you guys could come to given different decisions you make and whatnot. Just letting everything be kind of freeform while having either specific points that I keep note of that will happen more or less regardless of what you do, or just coming up with things as they come about with just the actors or the NPCs continuing to do sort of reacting in response to you guys.
I could say, though, with Ian's campaign, I can think of 4 other ways, or not campaign, but where his setting, it could go like 4 different ways. We established a dog that was on the area that could easily be a point
Challenge.
for an adventure. We established that the caretaker was sick at the moment, and the light was going to go out, so something could happen with that. So I think it unfolds itself for longer.
I did take that into consideration when writing this, because the idea of an open-ended campaign is something I've seen a lot in tabletop games, especially recently. People who are tired of the structure of D&D have wanted campaigns that they can play where they don't feel like they're limited by what skill points you have, what actions are available to you. With that knowledge, I built a campaign, or one-shot, where you had multiple options for everything you did. There was like 3 or 4 different ways to get actually into the lighthouse. There was an entire area you ended up not exploring because you didn't necessarily have to, because you had the option to just force your way in without the key, for example.
Yeah.
It's something that if you know what you're looking at, you can definitely plan around, I will say. But taking those steps will help this game, I think, have a higher replay value overall.
Oh, yeah. On our sliding scales.
Here we go. Should we do them at the same time? I don't remember if you guys have changed anything up.
I have not.
It's been a while.
I did a classic 2. I feel like there's a lot to this system that is similar to a lot of other games I've played. The D10 system, I feel like I've done this exact one before somewhere. But you see a lot of those kinds of get to the lower number kind of thing. And that's all this really is. It doesn't have a lot of...
It's like the golf of the TTRPG world.
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah.
I gave it a 3 classic.
I gave it a classic 1.
No.
There's not a whole lot there. And I mean, while it is good, there's just not a whole lot to grade it against. It's a very basic system.
Innovative 2.
Oh, explain.
I don't want to.
Justify your thoughts.
So I don't have Ian's experience with D10 systems. So this would have been my first time experiencing a system where you're, apart from, I think, technically Call of Cthulhu, where you're aiming to get lower than whatever your skill rating is. But this is the first time that I played a game where you have your skills and then you roll a d10 and you're trying to get equal to or less than your total, which to me that's new and innovative. Because usually your attributes just reflect either the number that you have to meet for excellence, or just represent the bonus that you add to your whatever you're doing, a la Dungeons and Dragons. So for me, it was a sort of new, refreshing thing, even though I failed 90% of the time.
All right, going into the last sliding scale, simple versus complex. I gave it a 3 simple. I feel like it's easy enough to get, and it's good for that. It benefits from being a simple game.
Same. I gave it a simple 3.
Simple 2, and that's again only because of the same problem that I mentioned before. I harp on this a lot, but the lack of structure does and can lead to confusion for both the player and the DM, specifically the player when it comes to the narrative.
Yeah. Simple 2. I think it's a very good game, but not super outstanding. I mean, it's not bad.
What a glowing way to end the section. So what is our overall score?
So I have a 35 out of 42.
33.5 out of 42.
I'll be honest, I've been trying to get a little stricter with my grading just because I tend to grade very high, so I have a 30 out of 42, but it doesn't reflect on my enjoyment of the game. I thoroughly enjoy this and plan on putting this into my rotation.
32.5.
All right. And for those of you at home, that brings our average to a 32.75, or just about a 33.
Hey.
Chris, I missed having you on.
Yeah.
It was nice having you back.
I do the numbers occasionally.
It brings a vibe. You bring a vibe.
You do.
I just rush you guys along.
You do.
Thank you for joining us at Dancing with the Bards. If you'd like to get in touch with us, you can find us at Dance with Bards on Twitter, or subscribe to our Twitch channel at twitch.tv/withbards. We're also on Mastodon at withbards at crater.gg.
That's with an 8.
Yeah, Crater with an 8. All right, thank you everyone for joining us.
Creative.
I honestly think this is a game worth checking out.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Bye.
Goodbye.
Bye. Love you.